anytime AWS has an outage is a big deal, right? But when it has an outage right before Black Friday, the biggest sales day of the year, leading into Cyber Monday, like that's a huge, huge thing. And so when they went down, they were down for like a solid 2 hours having big problems, and then like little problems carried on for a few more hours before it was all cleaned up after about 4 hours total. So it's a big deal. And the lesson that we get out of this is actually kind of an important one, so that's why I wanted to talk about it today, is they've had time now to analyze what happened. And the problem they had was with the AWS Kinesis service. Kinesis is basically like a giant fire hose of data. You can dump tons of data in there and it handles it. And they use it for a number of different things. And they use it themselves. So Amazon uses AWS Kinesis for a lot of their stuff. And they were trying to get ready for Black Friday, and they were wanting to scale their systems out to add more muscle behind the technology to make sure it could withstand the load they were about to hit. Well, as they started scaling out, things went crazy, and Kinesis basically stopped working. Or at least in the US East 1 region. So there's one particular data center, but that is the biggest of the data centers, the default that everybody uses. And when that went down, it was almost a comedy of errors after that, because Amazon's service status page depends on Kinesis for updates. And so they couldn't update their service status page to let people know that Kinesis was broken. And this isn't the first time that's happened. Amazon has just insisted on maintaining their own service status page on their own hardware, which is not something other companies do.
Yeah, that's kind of ironic. You can't say, that your site's down if your site's down.
Yeah, it's a bit of a marketing issue where on one hand, you want to be able to tell your customers the service is down, but on the other hand, you don't want to use a competitor's product to host the service. So, they say, by using our own hardware, we're testifying that it's great, that it's not going to go down, that we'll always be able to update it. And they did have a manual process, but it turns out nobody was really trained in the manual process for updating it. So it took them hours just to admit that they had an outage, which was a big problem.
So you mentioned the East Coast zone, and so that's what I was curious about, because, to me, what I understand about the benefit of being in the cloud is, well, if this zone goes down, the next one picks it back up. And obviously things might be slower because I'm getting my data from further and more people are accessing different zones. But were things technically down across the board?
So in AWS, and this goes for Azure as well, you have availability zones and you have regions, and those are different things. So a region is usually like a geographic region.
It's like Europe or...
Well, it's a little more specific. So like there's US East, which is a location in North Virginia. Or Northern Virginia. We don't actually have a North Virginia state. So
get one. Yeah.
In Northern Virginia, near Washington, D.C., basically, there is the U.S. East region. And in the U.S. East region, you have multiple availability zones. I think there's 5, maybe 6 altogether now, availability zones. Now, if one AZ goes down, the others stay up. But services like Kinesis spread across availability zones, and so they went down for that whole region. If you had resources in U.S. West or U.S. East 2, you were fine. But if you're in US East 1, you had an outage. And US East 1 is the default. So if you don't specify a region, that's the one you end up in. And so it's heavily used by a lot of people. And so, it turns out one way to dodge the bullet on this one is if you just chosen a different alternative.
That was one of the things I was wondering, and you kind of answered it, Don, is how a single region like that would affect so many, such a large portion of the internet. I mean, these are big companies. Roku is out. Who else? I mean, you think Tampa Bay Times is another one that's out there. I mean, these are big companies, and for a single zone to fail like this, and it affect everybody.
Adobe iRobot, people's Roombas stopped phoning home. They couldn't control their Roomba. What? Yeah, madness. Yeah. The interesting thing is, with Amazon, one of the things they always tell you is that you should scale out, not up, right? If I have a server that's getting under load, I could add more CPUs to it or add more RAM, but there's a limit that you hit. But if you scale out, you can add as many instances as you want and increase your muscle. Well, what happened here is a classic DevOps scenario where you have developers who understand their software, they understand their technology, but they don't understand the underlying operating system. And so with Kinesis uses thousands of servers, but all of the servers need to know about each other. So they have these threads that are open that connect each one to each other. Well, every server you add adds another thread. And this runs on top of Linux, and they had a maximum thread count set. And when they hit that maximum thread count, it went to hell. Like the whole system went crazy. And the solution was to go in and reboot. But their automation tools are wrapped up in Kinesis too, and they couldn't use those. They had to do manual reboots of thousands of servers. And their solution in the end was to scale up instead of scaling out. So it's kind of ironic. It's going against this advice they've given everybody for a long time. But they are scaling up now to be able to handle more threads that way. You just require less threads because their servers are able to do more work. So it's a bit of a lesson for a lot of people to learn is DevOps is dangerous in some scenarios if you don't understand the limitations of the operating system running underneath your software.
I wonder in the future if we'll see a change on what that default is, being default east like that, if we'll see that spread out a little bit more.
Yeah, there's not really a whole lot of reasons why you couldn't do that. It used to be that some services were only available in certain regions, but Amazon's done a good job of leveling the playing field across it. So unless you're deploying somewhere weird, like in Southeast Asia, or in Brazil, now you've got some limited features. But if you're deploying in the U.S. or Europe, it's pretty much feature parity.
Brazil is weird. You heard it here first. I'm so glad that you mentioned Roomba, though, because I realized now, and I just checked the date to be sure. On Wednesday, I was like driving somewhere, and I said, I should set the Roomba so I can, it'll be clean when I get home. And it kept saying, unavailable to connect to the network.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I have to be home for this tour? I thought I've done this before.
Yeah.
And I thought I was just dumb.
So you don't even realize how many systems depend on AWS. And so, there you just probably blamed the
iRobot.
people.
Yeah, exactly. And I blamed myself for not understanding it, but now I'm happy to know it wasn't just me. And thanks, Amazon, for making sure I didn't come home to a clean house.
If you enjoyed that segment, be sure to check out our entire podcast available in the playlist right here. And you can always subscribe to stay up to date with the latest tech news and other happenings in the IT world. Be sure to tune in every Thursday for new episodes. I hope to see you there.